So I'm back in the playing hall of the Chess.com Isle of Man International Tournament, and an absolutely splendid venue it is too. For my round one game of the day, I looked at a game of Vidit Gujrati's, one of the really strong Indian contingent here. And for my round two game of the day, I'd like to look at another encounter between two Indian players. There are so many in the tournament. At the top, of course, we have Viswanathan Anand. And then you've probably seen the two prodigies are playing, Nihal Sarin and Pragyanananda. And for this game, I'm looking at a game between two players you might not have heard of, but are equally promising, I would say. So we have, with the white pieces, Harsha Bharathakoti. Now he's 18 years old, played very well here last year, rated 24.92, and his opponent with black is SP Sethuraman, who's 25 years old, rated 26.73, and certainly knocking on the door of the Indian team. So without further ado, let's get on with the game. So Harsha Bharathakoti is playing white, and it starts out as a King's Indian. So we're almost guaranteed a tense fight, and particularly with the variation that Harsha selects. And here bishop g5 would lead to an Averbach, but he plays bishop e3, and this is a little bit unusual, but let's see what he has in mind. So you can see this development of the knight on g1 is being delayed, and well, here black has quite a selection of continuations. Well, c5, e5 are possible. Knight a6 played. I noticed this variation with bishop e2 and bishop e3 was played in the British Championship this year between David Howe and Gawain Jones, so it's quite current, quite popular. So knight a6, so this is a flexible move. Black might be playing e5, might be playing c5. And now here we see white's intentions with delaying the development of the king's knight. The g-pawn flies up the board, incredibly aggressive, of course, because you have to ask yourself, well, hang on, where is white's king going? Still not absolutely clear. So Sethuraman plonks a pawn out and attacks white's centre. So really, having played g4, white wants to maintain a closed centre and of course pushes on. So we have a kind of Benoni formation now with, well, all the counter-attacking that goes on with that. So e6 played. Now one could play g5 here, but and this was played in a particular game where white, black retreated with knight e8. But actually the move that I like here is to give up a pawn with knight h5, and I think with the pressure on the diagonal, I think black has pretty good counter-attacking chances there. So Harsha puts the brakes on for a moment and plays f3, just supporting the e-pawn. I mean, it looks slightly odd to have bishop e2 and f3 on the board. But let's see how this works out. So Sethuraman exchanged on d5 and played the knight back to c7, so possibly wanting to support the b5 push. And again, a6, possibly going for b5 a bit later. And white continues on his merry way, storming down the kingside with the h-pawn. I mean, I don't know how dangerous this attack is, to be honest. If black simply played rook b8 here and went for b5, of course, black has to be careful, but I don't know. My feeling is that black could survive this one, and just carry on with b5, but it's always very hard to know whether one should allow an attack or whether to block it, to do something about it. And Sethuraman decided pretty quickly that he was going to block the h-pawn with h5 himself. So if this is captured on h5, then black will recapture with a knight. So g5. Here I certainly think that black should play knight d7, because this knight simply has more freedom of movement. The knight could come into e5 much later on, and you still go for b5, of course. But instead, knight h7 played, and that looks like a very odd square for the knight because it's out of play for such a long time. Nevertheless, the king side is now blocked, and black can carry on with his queenside initiative. Now, Sethuraman played rook e8 here, which certainly looks very logical to attack down the e-file. But he could have played b5 here, no doubt, and then we just have an absolutely wild game on our hands. Maybe bishop f3 with the idea sometimes of e5, but you know, I'm slightly worried about white's king here actually, or possibly even very worried. Let's come back to this position. So rook e8 played after half an hour's thought. Looks logical to attack the pawn on e4. Bishop f3 defends, and bishop g4, looking to exchange off the bishop that is protecting the e-pawn. Now, I guess you could drop back with bishop e2, bishop g2, but that would leave the bishop on g4 in a splendid position. But Harsha decides to exchange, and then this was met by taking on c3, and only then recapturing on g4. Now this means you can see that white's e-pawn is under fire from the rook, and we're getting through to white's king here. If queen g2, for example, to support the e-pawn, then, well, we've got a deadly pin on the e-file, so let's go back. So Harsha, instead of actually trying to defend that, I think impossible by this stage to try and put the brakes on. Basically, he just gives up the e-pawn and manages to develop that king's knight finally, but on a very nice square actually, where it blockades that g-pawn, hits the rook, and is able to support the kingside pawn storm. So although black has broken through by taking on e4, in fact this position is not clear. Now here certainly I think the best move for black is to play rook e7, and then to be able to play queen e8. And although here white is a pawn down, obviously has some compensation. I mean, the knight on g3 stands very well, controlling really important squares, but and the knight on h7 I don't like. So I mean, this is just a very unclear position, but I think black should play that. Instead, Sethuraman went all the way back. King f2. Now that's a very cool move because white keeps the rook on h1. And here I think knight f8 is probably the best move, to just try to use that knight somehow. But Sethuraman obviously getting very confused. You know, he's using up a lot of time over these last couple of moves, and he put the rook on e7. But I think he's too late. And now watch what happens with white's attack. So the pawn storm is finally rolling again. Here we go, h5 played, and then f5. I mean, it's so brutal, it really is. So obviously terrible threats on the king side now, possibly threatening just to exchange on g6 and push with f6 and smash down the h-file. And it's very hard for black to counterattack. Rook e5 played, attacking the c-pawn, the d-pawn rather, which was defended by the c-pawn. Black takes, but I mean, this is a very difficult position. Bishop f4, so just wanting to attack that rook and then take on f5. So for example, if the rook goes back, knight takes f5 is looking just deadly, with the d-pawn threatened and, well, king side looking very weak. I mean, my first thought here was to give the rook, at least bring the queen's rook into play, but I mean, white, I think because of black's very poor pieces, the knight's really are not in the game at all. I think white just has a winning position here. But f6 played instead. And now just watch what happens. These pawns continue their march down the board. It just reminds me of that old pioneering computer game, Space Invaders. It looks like one of them is going to hit the end. And when that happens, black will be dead. It'll be reset time. Here, I think black's last chance is knight e4 check. And although, I mean, with these pawns, it must be good for white. There's no immediate win. I mean, it looks as though h7 is winning straight away with this. In fact, black is hanging on here remarkably. And it's probably more sensible to make sure that black isn't doing anything on the e-file first. I mean, I'm sure this is good for white, but it's still not absolutely clear, you know, when you've got a slightly exposed king. Anyway, rook e8 played instead. This rook was taken by the bishop. Pawn takes rook, and now a fantastic finish. This is brilliant stuff. Knight takes f5. So it's all about supporting those pawns, allowing a knight fork. This is the game continuation. The king step to the side. Knight takes queen, and although white is, well, practically a whole queen down after this move, g7, Sethuraman resigned. The pawns are going through. So let's just see exactly why he resigned. So if, for example, queen f7, then rather comically, h7 is checkmate. I mean, that is a beautiful position to finish on. Apart from that, we have king h7. Well, let's just take that queen and take the knight. Well, white is a whole rook up. And let's say knight takes pawn. Let's give a check there. Now, you could just take the queen, but we could also get a new queen as well. And this is completely winning for white. I think I'm going to leave that as our final position, because it's, well, every picture tells a story. There we are. And that's the story of this game. The charge of the g and h pawns down the board. But I tell you, this is a very tricky variation, and be very careful if you want to try this one out, because black has serious counter-attacking chances as well. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, and do subscribe to the channel. If you're not a subscriber already, you can find the button up there, free to subscribe. And of course, don't forget, if you want to join the inner circle and enjoy all the rewards that you can get for supporting the channel on patreon.com/PowerPlayChess. Do check it out. Thanks for watching.